Hi everyone, I'm Sylvester and I create educational content to help you dive deeper into the fascinating world of physiology and medicine. In today's video, we are exploring something truly incredible: the differences between fetal circulation and adult circulation. This topic is especially interesting because it highlights how our circulatory system adapts as we develop from life in the womb to life in the outside world. We will look at how the fetal circulatory system is uniquely designed to support life in utero by relying on the mother's body for oxygen and nutrients. Then we compare it to the adult circulatory system that we are more familiar with, which sort of operates independently. By the end of this video, you should understand the amazing physiological changes that happens at birth and why they are so essential for survival. So whether you are a student, whether you are a parent to be, or you are just curious, let's jump into this journey from the fetal to the adult circulation and uncover the secrets of how our bodies work. Well, so fetal circulation. Now, fetal circulation is more like a system by which the fetus receives oxygen and nutrients and also eliminates waste through the placenta. Okay, so it's a system made up of certain or specialized or key structures or key features. Okay, good. So that the fetus is able to receive nutrients. Okay, and at the end of the day, after utilizing those nutrients, they are able to get rid of those nutrients with the help of specialized structures. And one of those structures, a key among them, is the placenta and then the umbilical cord. But as we move on, we are going to look at a lot of specialized features, okay, that are also in place in the fetal circulation to facilitate this process or the functioning of this system. Okay, now, so these are some of the key structures in the fetal circulation. We wouldn't look at these key structures now. We'll move straight to look at the fetal circulatory pathway. Then we will bounce back and come and look at these specialized structures and their function. Now, in this video, I would be comparing the adult circulation to the fetal circulation. Okay, so along the line, I'll be bringing in certain features in the adult circulation to help us really comprehend the two systems that we are looking at in this video. Now, the fetal circulatory pathway, one of the things that I want you to remember is that the fetal circulation, we have this structure over here we call the umbilical cord. Now, the umbilical cord is made up of the umbilical vein, okay, and then the umbilical arteries. So this is the umbilical vein and then the umbilical arteries. These two together is what we refer to as the umbilical cord. Now, this umbilical cord gets attached, okay, to the uterus of the mother. Okay, it gets attached to the uterus of the mother. Okay, good. So this is the umbilical cord, okay, which is made up of the umbilical vein and then the umbilical arteries. Now, what you have to remember is that unlike the adult circulation, which starts with deoxygenated blood, the fetal circulation begins with oxygenated blood coming from the mother's circulatory system. Okay, so the first thing that you have to remember is that unlike the adult or the normal circulation, which begins with deoxygenated blood coming from the various parts of the body, the fetal circulation begins with oxygenated blood coming from the mother's circulatory system. That is the first thing that you have to note. Okay, so the fetal circulation begins with oxygenated blood. So in the fetal circulation, it do not begin with deoxygenated blood. It rather begins with oxygenated blood that is coming from the mother's circulatory system with the help of the placenta. Okay, so this umbilical cord made up of the umbilical vein and then the umbilical arteries is connected to the placenta. Okay, Good. So the oxygenated blood that is coming from the mother's circulatory system with the help of the placenta joins the umbilical cord and then moves through the umbilical vein. Okay, so the process actually starts with oxygenated blood. The fetal circulation, the process starts with oxygenated blood. Okay, so the moment you're explaining fetal circulation, you start with deoxygenated blood, it means you don't understand. Okay, the process actually starts with oxygenated blood, meaning blood that contains oxygen, okay, and then nutrients that are coming from the mother. They join the umbilical cord through the umbilical vein. Okay, good. So once they join the umbilical vein, ideally during circulation, okay, the blood is supposed to pass through the liver, okay, for kind of detoxification and other processes, other metabolic processes to take place. Okay, but then the fetus liver is not well developed, and so there is no need, and the blood that is coming contains oxygen and nutrients, and that blood is already, have already gone through the mother's hepatic circulation already. Okay, good. So there is no need for the blood to go through the liver of the fetus, so there should be a bypass. Okay, so the first bypass from the umbilical vein is the ductus venosus. Okay, so from the umbilical vein, the blood, okay, bypass the liver, okay, and then with the help of the ductus venosus and goes straight into the inferior vena cava. Okay, it goes straight into the inferior vena cava. Okay, now from the inferior vena cava, ideally, okay, in the normal circulation, once the blood gets to the inferior vena cava, it's supposed to enter the right atrium. From the right atrium, it's supposed to move into the right ventricles. Okay, now with the fetal circulatory pathway, when the blood from the umbilical vein bypasses the liver with the help of the ductus venosus and gets to the inferior vena cava, it moves straight into the right atrium. From the right atrium, there is a bypass for the blood not to, go through the right ventricle, but then there is a bypass for the blood to move straight from the right atrium into the left atrium. Okay, there is a bypass over there. Okay, and that bypass, okay, so there is a bypass, and that bypass is called the foramen ovale. Okay, so the moment the oxygenated blood coming from the umbilical vein, which has bypassed the liver with the help of the ductus venosus, gets into the inferior vena cava, it empties into the right atrium, and instead of going directly, okay, into the right ventricle, it bypasses and moves straight into the left atrium with the help of the foramen ovale, which is an opening that helps the blood to bypass and move straight into the left atrium. Okay, now let's assume once the blood is flowing, okay, there is a certain amount of the blood, okay, can enter, will still find its way to enter the right ventricle. If that should happen, what it means is that once blood enters the right ventricle, we know that it is going into the lungs, okay, with the help of the pulmonary artery. Okay, but what you have to note is that in fetal circulation, the fetal lungs are not that developed, okay, for the process of oxygenation. So there is no need for the blood to go to the fetal lungs. Okay, so there is a specialized structure over here. We call it the ductus arteriosus. Okay, so that if in case some amount of blood from the right atrium even finds its way into the right ventricle and is pumped into the pulmonary artery, the blood will not go to the lungs. It will move straight into the aorta. Okay, so there is a bypass over here. There is a bypass in the pulmonary artery. So that if in case, let's assume some amount of blood. So ideally, when the blood gets into the right atrium, it's supposed to use this bypass called the foramen ovale to go straight into the left atrium. Then from the left atrium, This is the left atrium. From the left atrium, it comes into the left ventricle. Then it is pumped into the aorta, or it moves into the aorta. Okay, so let's assume that a certain amount of blood still finds its way into the right ventricle. Okay, now it is in the right ventricle. There is no need. What you have to notice is that the fetal lungs are not that developed. So there is no need for the blood to get to, and already the blood that is coming is oxygenated. So there is no need for them to go back into the lungs for another oxygenation. Is that okay? Good. So even if a certain portion of the blood finds its way into the right ventricle and moves into the pulmonary artery, there is another bypass in the pulmonary artery directly into the aorta. We call that the ductus arteriosus. So the ductus arteriosus is like a bypass in the pulmonary artery, so that if in case, let's say mistakenly, a certain amount of the blood, okay, the stubborn ones have still made their way into the right ventricle, these bypass would allow the blood in the pulmonary artery, after that is coming from the right ventricle, to move directly into the aorta. And this bypass is what we call the ductus arteriosus. Okay, so let me begin again. So from the umbilical vein, okay, the oxygenated blood from the umbilical vein, it bypasses the liver with the help of the ductus venosus and moves straight into the inferior vena cava. Okay, so now still oxygenated blood. So the oxygenated blood gets to the right atrium. Okay, and then in the right atrium, a greater percentage of the blood moves straight, okay, into the left atrium. Okay, so instead of in the normal circulation, this blood over here would have moved, okay, this blood in the right atrium would have moved to the right ventricle. But no, in the fetal circulation, it's already oxygenated. And in addition to that, the fetal lungs are not well properly developed. Okay, so it wouldn't be able to, facilitate this oxygenation process. Okay, and that is the reason why fetal circulation, it starts with oxygenated blood. So these oxygenated blood do not need to go through the pulmonary circulation again. So there is a bypass straight, okay, with the help of the foramen ovale, okay, to help the blood move directly from the right atrium directly into the left atrium. Okay, now let's assume a certain portion of the blood still made its way. Okay, so let's assume per chance a certain amount of blood still made their way into the right ventricles and happens to go through the pulmonary artery, just as we have in the adult circulation or normal circulation. Now, this blood will still not get to the lungs. There is a bypass in the pulmonary artery called the ductus arteriosus, which would help the blood to move directly from the pulmonary artery into the aorta. So let's assume per chance this oxygenated blood in the right atrium, per chance there was a mistake, some have still entered the right ventricle. It will go through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery, all right, just as we have in the normal circulation, but it will still not go to the lungs because we don't need the lungs, they are not developed. Okay, so there is a bypass over here called the ductus arteriosus. Okay, and these ductus arteriosus help the blood to move directly from the pulmonary artery through to the aorta direct. Is that okay? So that it goes directly into the baby's systemic circulation. Okay, good. That is it. Now, the blood that moves from the right atrium directly into the left atrium, they also come into the left ventricle. Then they are pumped into the aorta. Okay, so at the end of the day, we have blood coming from, so per chance the blood that entered the right ventricles, which moved into the pulmonary artery and joined the aorta directly with the help of the ductus arteriosus, and the blood that went through the foramen ovale, that is from the right atrium to directly to the left atrium, they would come through from the left atrium through to the left ventricle, and then they are pumped into the aorta. That is what happens. Okay, good. Now, what you have to pay attention to is that now the blood is now the oxygenated blood is now in the aorta. Okay, so from there it moves to the various parts of the fetus, through the smaller arterioles, then from the smaller arterioles to the capillaries, and then at the capillary level, oxygenation takes place, exchange of gases and nutrients takes place. Then the baby the tissues utilizes these oxygen or these gases, and then the end product come back through the smaller venules. Okay, good. Then into it goes back to join what we call the umbilical arteries. Okay, so after the baby have utilized all these nutrients, it come back to join the umbilical arteries. Okay, then the umbilical arteries goes back to join the placenta. Okay, and then it ejects it into the mother's circulatory system for the whole process to begin again. Okay, so the process begins with the umbilical vein and then ends with the umbilical artery. So this umbilical artery actually contains deoxygenated blood from the fetus. Okay, the umbilical arteries, they actually contain deoxygenated blood from the fetus, and the umbilical veins rather contains oxygenated blood, okay, from the fetus. Okay, this oxygenated blood is coming from the mother's circulatory system. Okay, so the oxygenated blood that is coming from the mother's circulatory system, okay, the oxygenated blood, it doesn't go through the hepatic circulation of the baby. There is a bypass such that the blood do not go to the liver. There is a bypass, okay, and that bypass is called the ductus venosus. Okay, now these bypass would help the blood in the umbilical vein to move directly into the inferior vena cava without having to go through the liver. Now, the oxygenated blood is now in the inferior vena cava. In the inferior vena cava, ideally, if it was the normal adult circulation, once the blood in the inferior vena cava is supposed to get into the right atrium and then move into the right ventricle. But no, in the fetal circulation, the blood is already oxygenated. So that should tell you, that one alone should tell you there is no need for it to go through the lungs again for oxygenation. Okay, so there are systems in place, there are structures, adapted structures in place, okay, to sort of prevent the blood from going to areas that, are not relevant. Okay, so for example, this structure over here, the ductus venosus, is there because the liver is not well developed to undergo certain process. And secondly, the blood that is coming is already oxygenated, it's coming from the mother's systemic circulation and already contains nutrients and is already detoxified. A lot of work has been done on it by the mother's hepatic system already. So there is no need for it to go through that process again. Okay, good. So the blood gets shunt or bypassed, okay, the liver and gets to the inferior vena cava. Once it enters the inferior vena cava, it moves straight into the right atrium. Then from the right atrium, there is a bypass for the blood, instead not to go to the right ventricle, but to move straight into the left ventricle. In the normal adult circulation, the blood that is coming from the inferior vena cava and then the superior vena cava would have entered the right ventricles and then go through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery before they are sent to the lungs for oxygenation to take place. And that is the pulmonary circulation. Okay, so what you should know is that in the fetal circulation, it's more like there is a bypass, okay, for the hepatic circulation and then the pulmonary circulation. There is a bypass. Okay, there is a bypass. It's like we are trying to do away with the pulmonary circulation. Okay, so what are the structures in place to help do away with the pulmonary circulation? So let's assume, so the blood in the right atrium was supposed to move into the right ventricle. Okay, the blood over here was supposed to move into the right ventricle, but there is this structure over here, the foramen ovale. This foramen ovale help the blood to bypass and move straight into the right atrium. So instead of going into the right ventricle, there is a bypass to help the blood enter directly from the right atrium into the left atrium. And that is what we call the foramen ovale. So these foramen ovale would enable the blood in the right atrium to go straight into the left atrium. Okay, good. Now let's assume that per chance, okay, a certain percentage of the blood, okay, moved into the right ventricle per chance. That will mean that they will also go through the pulmonary valve and then enter the pulmonary artery. Now, the blood has entered the pulmonary artery, all right, but it wouldn't get through the lungs. Why? Because there is another structure over here we call the ductus arteriosus in the fetal circulation, which would help the blood that has perchance entered the pulmonary artery to move straight into the aorta. And we don't have that structure in the adult or normal circulation. Is that so? That should tell you that no matter the situation, we are bypassing the pulmonary circulation. We are bypassing the pulmonary circulation. Okay, so now we've bypassed the pulmonary circulation. Now we have some of the blood directly from the ductus arteriosus into the aorta. The one that moved from the right atrium through the foramen ovale into the left atrium would also move to the ventricle, the left ventricle, and then join the aorta. Then now the blood is in the aorta. It will go through the various parts of the body. Okay, it will get to supply the various parts of the body. Then now, after going to supply the various parts of the body, what I mean is that it will get to the tissues through the small arterioles and then to the capillaries. Then there is exchange of gases, okay, between the blood and the tissues of the baby, of the fetus, and then the deoxygenated blood, okay, containing waste products will now come and join the descending aorta in the fetal circulation. Then from the descending aorta, it joins the umbilical arteries. Then from the umbilical arteries, it go and join the placenta again and is ejected into the mother's circulatory system again. Then the process will now begin again. Okay, so now unlike the fetal circulation, whereby it begins with oxygenated blood, what you should know is that the adult circulation begins with deoxygenated blood. So now with the adult circulation, it begins with deoxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood that is coming, okay, from the superior vena cava, that is the upper part of the body, and the inferior vena cava. These deoxygenated blood, they are emptied into the right atrium. Here is the right atrium. Okay, so you could see the color is even blue. This should tell you that the blood in the right part of the heart is blue, is deoxygenated. Okay, so the blood that is coming from the upper part of the body through the superior vena cava, and the blood that is coming from the lower part of the body through the inferior vena cava, all of them empties into the right atrium. Okay, then now from the right atrium, the blood will now pass through this valve over here. We call it the tricuspid valve. In some literatures, they will call it the right atrioventricular valve. Okay, so the tricuspid valve or the right atrioventricular valve and empties into the right ventricle. Okay, so you could see in the adult circulatory pathway, there is no bypass for the blood to move from the right atrium into the left ventricle directly. No. Okay, because in the adult circulatory pathway, we need the pulmonary circulation. The adult is outside of uterus, so oxygenation have to be independently regulated. Okay, so the blood from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava empties into the right atrium, comes through the tricuspid valve or the right atrioventricular valve, and then empties into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, now the blood has to go to the lungs. Okay, so it will pass through this pulmonary valve and empties into, so that this right ventricle, the walls of the right ventricle will contract. As it contracts, the tricuspid valve will close. Okay, so as it contracts and the tricuspid valve closes, the blood is emptied into the pulmonary artery by going through the pulmonary valve. Okay, and that is the reason why we say that all arteries carry oxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary artery. This is where that statement is coming from. So you see, this blood is deoxygenated. When it enters the pulmonary artery, this is an artery, all right, but it is now going to carry or contain deoxygenated blood. So this pulmonary artery will carry the deoxygenated blood through its two branches, which is the right pulmonary artery and then the left pulmonary artery, and it will carry it to the lungs for oxygenation to take place. Now, after the blood has been oxygenated, it will come back into the heart. Now, when it's coming back from the heart, okay, it will come through the pulmonary veins, and that is the reason why we also say that all veins carry deoxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary vein. This is where that statement is coming from. Okay, so these are the pulmonary veins. Okay, the left pulmonary vein and then the right pulmonary vein, they will empty into the left atrium. So now the blood in the left atrium is what? Oxygenated. Then the oxygenated blood will now move through what we call the bicuspid valve or the left atrioventricular valve and empties into the left ventricle. Now the left ventricle will contract. When it contracts, this bicuspid valve will close. Okay, and as the bicuspid valve closes, pressure is generated within, and then the blood moves into the aorta. Okay, the blood moves into the aorta. Okay, and then it gets into the systemic circulation. So the systemic circulation actually starts from here. Systemic circulation in adults or adult systemic circulation actually begins from oxygenated blood coming from the lungs, joining the left atrium. Okay, so the oxygenated blood coming from the lungs with the help of the left and right pulmonary artery coming to empty into the left atrium. And then from the left atrium, it moves through the bicuspid valve or the left atrioventricular valve and empties into the left ventricle. The left ventricle contracts, and as it contracts, the bicuspid valve closes, and then the blood empties into the aorta. Okay, this is what we call systemic circulation. So adult circulation is actually divided into two. We have the pulmonary circulation, and then we have systemic circulation. So anytime you are explaining adult circulation, you have to explain it from the two sides. You would be talking about the pulmonary circulation. Okay, we are saying pulmonary circulation because that is the level where the deoxygenated blood would march straight to the lungs for oxygenation to take place. Okay, so let me go over it again and we summarize everything. So like I said earlier on, for the adult circulation or the normal circulation, if you are asked to explain normal circulation, you start with deoxygenated blood. So the deoxygenated blood that is coming from the various parts of the body, they all join. Those from the upper part of the body will join through the superior vena cava, and those from the lower part of the body will join through the inferior vena cava. At the end of the day, with the help of the superior vena cava and inferior vena, they all empty into the right atrium. Now, the deoxygenated blood in the right atrium goes through the tricuspid valve or the right atrioventricular valve and empties into the right ventricle. Now, from the right ventricle, okay, we are now going to pulmonary circulation. Okay, so from the right ventricle of the heart will contract. Okay, as it contracts, the tricuspid valve will close, and then the blood would empty into the pulmonary artery. Okay, so now we have deoxygenated blood in the pulmonary artery, and that is the reason we have this popular saying that all arteries carry oxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so now in the pulmonary artery, we are going to the lungs for the deoxygenated blood to be oxygenated. Okay, and that is possible with the two branches of the pulmonary artery, which is the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery, which will carry the blood to the lungs for oxygenation to take place. Then the oxygenated blood will now return to the heart again with the help of the left and right pulmonary veins. And that is why we have a popular saying that all veins carry deoxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary veins. Okay, because these pulmonary veins will be bringing oxygenated blood, will be carrying it towards back into the heart. Okay, and that is also one of the reasons why we have a popular saying that all veins, okay, all veins, if you look at it, all the arteries over here, arteries actually carries blood away from the heart. Okay, but if you look at pulmonary arteries. Okay, if you look at arteries are actually carrying blood away from the heart. Veins are carrying the blood towards the heart. Is that okay? Veins are actually carrying blood towards the heart. So you could see the pulmonary vein is a vein mostly because the key function of a vein is they carry blood towards the heart. Okay, that is why this qualifies to be a vein. And another reason why the pulmonary artery, okay, even though it carries deoxygenated blood, okay, whilst we know the general thing is arteries are supposed to carry oxygenated blood. Even though it carries deoxygenated blood, it is considered an artery because it is carrying blood away from the heart. That is why it qualifies as a pulmonary artery, or it qualifies as an artery because it is carrying blood away from the heart. So even if you look at the superior vena cava, which is a vein, it is bringing blood towards the heart. Okay, so any sort of vessel that is bringing blood towards the heart is a vein. Okay, and the ones that are carrying blood away from the heart is considered an artery. Okay, and that is the key reason why, even though the pulmonary artery, even though it carries deoxygenated blood, it is regarded as an artery. Okay, it is regarded as an artery. Well, that is also another point that you can note. So now the oxygenated blood, with the help of the left and right pulmonary vein, joins the left atrium. Okay, and then it moves through the bicuspid valve or the left atrioventricular valve, and then it gets emptied into the left ventricle. The left ventricle of the heart will contract, and the blood will move straight into the aorta with the help of the aortic valve. So it will pass through the aortic valve, or the aortic valve will open. Okay, so when the left ventricle of the heart contracts, the bicuspid valve will close, the aortic valve will open. Okay, then the blood will move straight into the aorta. That should tell you that all the valves in the heart, they are one-way valves, meaning they do not allow backflow of blood. Okay, so all the valves that are in the heart, they are one-way valves. So this bicuspid valve is a one-way valve, meaning that it only facilitates movement through one direction, and that is forward movement. It's also something that you have to note. So this valve over here is a one-way valve, meaning it only allows forward movement through one direction. This one too is a one-way valve. The pulmonary valve is also a one-way valve. Okay, so now with the differences, in summary, all we are saying is that the fetal circulation begins with oxygenated blood that is coming from the mother. So the baby or the fetus is able to receive oxygen and nutrients, and also able to eliminate waste products with the help of a structure called the placenta, which is attached to the uterus of the mother, or which is implanted at a certain stage of development, to the uterus of the mother. Now the baby gets connected to this placenta with the help of a structure called the umbilical cord. This umbilical cord is made up of umbilical vein and then the umbilical artery. Now, in summary, is this umbilical vein that begins the fetal circulatory pathway. So the oxygenated blood that is coming from the mother's systemic circulation, starts the fetal circulatory pathway, by coming from the placenta to join the umbilical vein. So we are saying the umbilical vein. So the umbilical vein will come with the oxygenated blood. Ideally, it was supposed to go to the liver through the hepatic circulation, but there is no need because it's not well developed. So there is a bypass. There is a structure that helps the blood to move directly. So instead of coming here to come and join the hepatic circulation through this and go through the liver, there is a bypass for it to go straight and go and join the inferior vena cava without going through the liver. And that structure is what we call the ductus venosus. So this ductus venosus would help the umbilical vein to join directly the inferior vena cava without going through the liver. So now these bypass, the ductus venosus, now the blood has gone through it. The blood is now in the inferior vena cava. From the inferior vena cava, the blood moves straight into the right atrium. From the right atrium, okay, if we were dealing with the adult or normal circulation, the blood would have come straight into the right ventricle, but there is no need because this blood is already oxygenated. So there is a bypass over here we call the foramen ovale, which will help the blood in the right atrium to move directly into the left atrium. Okay, the reason is because we don't need the blood to go to the right ventricle for it to go to the lungs for oxygenation. The blood is already oxygenated. Okay, now, so per chance, let's assume that the blood in the right atrium is supposed to move directly into the left atrium through the foramen ovale, but per chance some have entered the right ventricle, which is possible or which will usually occur. Now, if that should happen, okay, the blood that has moved from the right atrium of the fetal circulation to the right ventricle will move into the pulmonary artery. Now, there is another structure in the pulmonary artery called the ductus arteriosus, okay, which is there to help the blood to bypass directly from the pulmonary artery directly into the aorta without the blood going through the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. So, per chance, even if mistakes should happen and the blood, some should enter the right ventricle, it will still not go to the lungs because of the ductus arteriosus. It will go straight into the aorta. Now, the blood that moves through the foramen ovale into the left atrium, some will enter, it will go straight into the left ventricle, and then it will be pumped into the aorta. Then it goes to the baby's circulation. It goes to supply the tissues with the help of the smaller arterioles, which will further join the capillaries, and then at the capillary level, exchange of gases, nutrients, and all those things will take place. Okay, then the deoxygenated blood, including the waste product, all will join the descending aorta. Okay, still the fetal circulation. They join the descending aorta. Then from the descending aorta, they join the umbilical arteries. Okay, and once they join the umbilical arteries, they go back to the placenta. Okay, and then it's ejected into the mother's circulation again. Okay, then the whole process will still begin again. So basically, this is the fetal circulation. Okay, so now the structures that we have in the fetal circulation, we have that we do not have in the normal adult circulation. You can remember we have the umbilical vein. We didn't mention umbilical vein in the normal adult circulation. We have the umbilical vein, which carries the oxygenated blood directly through the ductus venosus into the inferior vena cava. Okay, we also have an umbilical artery over here. Anyway, let's go in order. So we have a new structure over here we don't have. So the structures we don't have in the normal circulation, we have the umbilical vein, we have the ductus venosus, we have the foramen ovale, we have the ductus arteriosus. Okay, and then we have the umbilical arteries. These structures, we don't have them in the adult circulation. And they can ask you in exams that which of the following structures are present, okay, to facilitate fetal circulation but absent in normal circulation. You should be looking for umbilical vein, ductus venosus, foramen ovale, ductus arteriosus, okay, and then umbilical arteries. Is that okay? If they should ask you in exam, okay, which structure actually brings the oxygenated blood, okay, or carries the oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus, is the umbilical vein. Okay, so it's the umbilical vein. Which structure help the blood in the umbilical vein to bypass and move directly into the inferior vena cava? Is the ductus venosus. Okay, and which structure help the blood in the right atrium of the fetus to move directly into the left atrium? That one we are referring to the foramen ovale. And then which structure that per chance the blood that has entered the right ventricle from the right atrium, okay, which is currently in the pulmonary artery, which structure help bypasses directly into the aorta without necessarily taking it to the lungs? That is the ductus arteriosus. Okay, so you could see all the various structures have their specialized functions. So these are the key structures in the fetal circulation. Okay, so the umbilical vein, which carries oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus. The ductus venosus, which shunts the oxygenated blood from the umbilical vein directly for it to join the inferior vena cava. This is what we are talking about. The ductus venosus. Okay. Then the foramen ovale. The foramen ovale is an opening between the right and left atrium, allowing blood to bypass the non-functional fetal lungs. Okay, so like I was saying, these fetal lungs are not functioning. So we don't need the blood to come through, the right ventricle and go through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. So there is a shunt over here, the ductus arteriosus, okay, which connects the pulmonary artery to the aorta direct. Okay, then we have the umbilical artery. So these are the key structures in the fetal circulation: the umbilical vein, the ductus venosus, the foramen ovale, the ductus arteriosus, okay, and then the umbilical arteries. The umbilical arteries. All right, so this brings us to the end of the fetal circulation. This brings us to the end of the fetal circulation. Now, someone would ask that, okay, so these specialized structures that are there during the fetal circulation, after or postnatal, what happens to these structures? Now, postnatal, a structure like most of these structures would eventually they will turn into ligaments. Okay, so for example, the ductus venosus. Okay, the ductus venosus, after the umbilical cord has been cut, okay, the blood that is flowing through the placenta will stop. Okay, and these ductus venosus, okay, the ductus venosus, it will gradually close after a few days and turn into a ligament. And it becomes a ligament that we call the ligamentum venosum. Okay, it's a fibrous ligament that forms part of the liver. Is that okay? Because you realize that the ductus venosus is even closer to the liver. So postnatal, after some days, the ductus venosus will close and then it gradually becomes a ligament. Okay, now for example, the foramen ovale. Okay, the foramen ovale, for example, would eventually also it will seal completely, okay, after some days, and then it forms what we call the fossa ovalis. The fossa ovalis is like a small indentation in the wall between the atria, okay, and it forms part of the atria. The ductus arteriosus, for example, the moment the baby starts breathing, okay, these ductus arteriosus would, it will begin to now constrict, and eventually it will close after some few days of the life of the baby, and eventually it also becomes a fibrous remnant, okay, and we call that ligament arteriosum. It becomes a ligament. Okay, the umbilical vein, it also turns into ligamentum teres, okay, which is also a ligament that forms part of the liver. Okay, good. The same thing applies to the umbilical arteries. The umbilical arteries also turns into a ligament that forms part of the abdominal wall. Okay, it forms part of what we call the medial umbilical ligament, which forms part of the abdominal wall. Okay, so this is how the whole physiology, the whole process actually works. Okay, so right after delivery, after some few days, these structures turns into ligaments and forms part of existing organs in the body. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the fetal circulation.